To my dear Prince Alexis. I did not usurp the crown. I found it in the gutter, and I picked it up with my sword. And it was the people, Alexis. The people who put it on my head. He who saves a nation violates no law.
The French Revolution, murder, bloodshed, and the onset of an age of darkness. Read any modern history book, and you will be quickly convinced that this moment was the birth of freedom and liberation. What you will not be taught in these books is an honest, unbiased perspective of both arguments. Shortly after the revolution took place, writers and thinkers such as Edmund Burke, Thomas Carlyle, and Abe Barul offered critical perspectives, pointing out the unforeseen consequences that could, and in many cases did, arise from the bringing down of the aristocracy. By the time of the Revolution, the French court had become the center of decadence in Europe. Figures such as Marquis de Sade and the ideology of libertinism, which was the idea of extremist hedonism, had eroded the medieval Christian mindset that had created the high culture of the Middle Ages. As with all things, change was inevitable, and as that change began to occur, a large variety of ideas would emerge within the void that was created. The fall of the French crown and the Ancien Regime that stood for thousands of years in Europe would soon fall victim to wars of both brothers and ideas. You're watching Western Brahmin. This is episode 7. In episode 6, we covered the English Civil War and the break between Protestantism and Catholicism. This tension caused a shift in the minds of Europeans. The overwhelming prosperity of Christendom had caused many of the ruling families and nobility to become weak and decadent. The rise of literacy and printing of copies of the Bible had given commoners the ability to interpret the text on their own. Due to this shift in technology, the Reformation was inevitable. In the book Decline of the West, Oswald Spengler explains how civilizations rise and fall. You may have heard the phrase, strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men, in reference to the cyclical patterns of civilization. The Reformation breathed life into the culture that had begun to stagnate, but at the same time other ideas were also emerging that would find their way into the minds of Europeans. The prosperity of the Middle Ages had expanded industry and technology, bringing with it the study of science and the university. These institutions would produce masterpieces of innovation that revolutionized life on all fronts as the Age of Enlightenment began. The prosperity created by 1,000 years of Christendom allowed for leisure time among many of the wealthier merchants and nobility, causing thinkers from all over Europe to envision new ways of ordering society. The French king, Louis XIV, was the poster boy for decadence and grandiosity. During his reign, a movement known as libertinism would become popular among the nobles. Throughout France, Britain, and other countries where Protestant sects expounded, liberal concepts emerged as a response to Protestant and Catholic tensions. This new concept of liberty was appealing to the merchants whose ability to gain wealth and power were limited by the crown. The French Revolution would become an ethnic war between the Indo-European aristocracy and the merchant classes, leading the overthrow of the Bourbon monarchy and the end of the Ancien Regime. This new shift in government brought with it the concept of nation-state and democracy. Throughout history, with some exception, rule over land was defined more by the territory controlled by a king or a warlord, who was the sole protector and owner of its people. France would fall into chaos and turmoil, leading to the reign of terror and the death of thousands. Robespierre, the man who initiated the Reign of Terror, was the leader of a group known as Jacobins, not to be confused with the Jacobites we covered in episode 6. The Jacobins were a radical left-wing political group whose ideology was not much different than that of the modern progressives. The radical ideas of sexual liberation, anti-Christian, and anti-monarchist views held by today's far left were forged in the minds of Jacobins during this period. A short-lived form of communism would even be attempted in Paris. During the Revolution, a soldier from Corsica, known as Napoleon Bonaparte, would expose a massive hole in the notions of liberty, anarchy, and socialism that the Revolution philosophers had failed to see. Napoleon supported the ideas of the Enlightenment, but recognized that equality was no match for military might. The fall of Louis XVI opened a power vacuum among the chaos in France, and Napoleon Bonaparte wasted no time in filling that void. His empire would stretch from the English Channel to the expanses of the Russian Empire, with it the spirit of revolution. The events in France would send a shockwave throughout Europe that would rattle its cage and forever change the face of Europe. In Germany, where the Munster Rebellion had previously occurred, similar ideas were already taking hold, but a different brand of reform would begin to develop. Martin Luther had challenged the authority of the Catholic Church with his 99 Theses. With the authority of the Church in question, different thinkers all across Europe began to propose alternative methods and ideologies for how the Church and society itself should be organized. The 30 Years' War would pit reformers and counter-reformers against one another, causing carnage all across the continent. The conflicts that amassed as a result of the ideological divide in Europe would give rise to leaders that adopted a form of enlightened despotism, combining the ideas of enlightenment with the mindset of a strong leader. Germany and other continental countries would begin to produce a system of reordering society that was different than the liberty-minded thinkers of France and Britain. The rise of Frederick the Great would turn the small province of Brandenburg into one of the great superpowers of the continent, and with it came the ideas of Prussian socialism. Frederick's father, Frederick Wilhelm I, was a Protestant and was known as the Soldier King. His regime fostered the early beginnings of a barracks culture in Prussia, with military esteem being the guiding force of its society. Frederick detested the orderly structure of his father's court as a young man, instead choosing to pursue Enlightenment philosophers and thinkers like that of Voltaire. Frederick would later embrace the strongman ideas of his father and combine them with his Enlightenment views, giving Frederick the distinction of the philosopher king. Prussia, under the rule of Frederick the Great, would undergo social reforms and military conquests that would shape German landscape and the mindset of its people into one of socialism, militarism, and nationalism. In this burgeoning new culture of diverse ideas and prosperity, the foundations of the modern world would begin to emerge as Christendom was swallowed up by science, progress, and the Industrial Revolution. As the 18th century closed, the void created by liberal reforms in the heart of Europe would produce thinkers such as Karl Marx, who felt that reform was insufficient. Only revolution and total uprooting of Western culture could bring a new way of life, of peace and prosperity. Marx's ideas, whether intended or not, seek to eliminate the drive of the individual to rise above the herd. In order to bring forth the Marxist utopia, all of human nature would have to be equalized, mechanized, and made devoid of individual aspirations. All spiritual and ideological concepts that could produce a figure like Napoleon or Frederick the Great would need to be neutralized or eliminated. These ideas of Marxism would seep into the fabric of German society and slowly begin to make their way across the globe. Western writers and thinkers such as Carlyle, de Maistre, and Burke saw the dangers of what was happening, but did not see as far into the future as one particular young man. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche knew that Christianity had begun to stagnate and lose the elements of mankind's soul that had produced men like Napoleon, men that could rise above the mundane life of the herd. Nietzsche realized that the philosophy of men like Marx would not produce a culture of supermen, but only shift the herd from one ideology to a new, one of what Nietzsche called the last man. To Nietzsche, the goal of mankind should be to perfect oneself and overcome the herd in its misguided path of the last man. In his eyes, overcoming the herd was something that only a select group of men were capable of, as much as society lacked the will to explore the depths of their own psyche and seek to overcome it. He would call these select men the Übermensch, or the Overman. The famous quote that is often cited by leftists, "God is dead, and we have killed him," represents anything but what the modern leftist interprets. Mankind no longer functioned in a state of intuition. The Enlightenment had given man the ability to view his culture and his own behavior through a microscope, which would shatter the mythological glue that held society together. Nietzsche realized that mankind would soon enter an age where society would lack a common tribal myth able to produce men of power in a society rife with nihilism. Nietzsche's magnum opus, Thus Spake Zarathustra, would be his attempt at providing a handbook for men brave enough to make an attempt at overcoming the herd morality of the masses. Since sheep-like qualities are championed by the herd as being good, herd mentality pressures individuals into becoming good, that is, weak and obedient. The higher man, if he is to achieve greatness, must escape the clutches of herd morality and renounce it in favor of his own self-created and life-affirming morality. Today we are seeing Nietzsche's predictions unfold before our eyes. In the last 2 years we have witnessed the agents of the last man unveil their intentions upon the world stage. We have seen just how real herd mentality has become and how ruthless the last man will be at gripping the pearls of his own safety. A deep fracture has opened up between the purveyors of safety and the defenders of nature that will only grow wider as the religion of comfort and egalitarianism further their attempt at leveling humanity and squashing human nature. But a tree has begun to blossom among the pastures of the herd. The lover of nature and life, the man whose inner wolf seeks to devour every inch of the herd inside their being, sees these events as merely another test of their own will. Among the chaos of the 18th and 19th century, men like Napoleon showed us that these attempts to level the herd hold no weight against an individual possessed by a will to power. We have become enlightened as a culture. There is no turning back to a culture driven by intuition until all of existence as we know it is one day annihilated. We are living among the last man. Some among us will become Napoleons of the psyche, instilling an enlightened despotism over our own being and conquering the weakness of the world wherever it hides.